Hey there, this is Greg Paskal. I was just watching a Twitter feed today and I noticed that there was some discussion around xPaths and how you use them in test automation. I love xPaths. We use them exclusively in the automation we build and they work very reliably. But the fact is that xPaths have got a really bad rap from just online examples that use tools in some very strange ways. And I want to try to help debunk that and help you to understand how you can use xPaths very reliably. So I'm going to show you a sample today of how to do that. So let's get started, and we're going to be using a sample site that you're going to see up here on my screen in just a moment. And I suggest you maybe bookmark this. It could be really useful for times when you're trying to experiment with your test automation and you need a great site to go through and maybe try interacting with certain types of fields or whatever before you get deeper into your actual application. So let's get started. So on my screen here, I've already got the URL brought up. It's the-internet.herokuapp.com. And what I like about this site is they provide a whole bunch of variations of things that you can work with. So today we're going to go and experiment with form authentication, and I'm going to show you how to do some xPath examples. So let's click on form authentication, and we see kind of your classic login page. Nothing too out of the ordinary from probably what you see in most of the websites that you work with that you have to authenticate into. We're going to go ahead in Chrome, which is what I've logged into right now. We're going to go ahead and use what's called the developer tools. These may sound intimidating as tools, but I want you to give it a try and see how valuable these tools can be. So go ahead, I'm going to show you how to get into them right now. So here I am within Chrome. I'm going to go ahead and click this little icon up here in the upper right corner, and I'm going to go to more tools. And unfortunately, this is probably going to be off the edge of the screen that's recording, but as soon as you go to more tools, you'll see an option that says developer tools. As soon as I do that, I'll get a section of code that pops up right here, and this kind of allows me to see this page from a different perspective, really from the code and the attributes and lots of things that DevTools has built into it. So to start off with, in a typical login page like this, what we're trying to probably first interact with be the username field and the password field, and of course some sort of login button. So how do you make an xPath for this, and why did we bring up the DevTools? So let's go ahead and get started. One of the first things I'm going to do is go into this username field. I'm going to simply right-click my mouse and I'm going to go to Inspect. And I want you to notice what happens over here in the DevTools panel as soon as I do that. So I'm brought to basically this section of code that is used to create this field. Now, DevTools allows you to do all kinds of creative things. But for now, we're going to just use this kind of like a spy. And we're going to use the attributes in this code to build the xPath that we want. So what I want to do next is show you a very typical xPath example that I like to use. So I'm going to go ahead. I have a little cheat sheet of a bunch of these that I've already pre-made. This is a neat feature within DevTools. But if I go to Find, I'm going to just do a Command F on my keyboard. You'll notice that a Find bar shows up here in DevTools. Let me cancel and show you that again. Command F brings up this simple find. And I'm going to go ahead and paste in basically a little template I'm going to begin to use. Okay, now xPaths are going to typically be based on a HTML tag. This is again for a web application, some sort of attribute, and oftentimes text or other things. So you're going to see how I'm going to use this field over here. Let's go ahead and bring it up again with Inspect, the attributes here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say, in this example, I've already got inputs chosen. So I'm using the input tag, It really does help to have some HTML background experience writing code in HTML if you're going to be an automation engineer. So that this section of code here's whole purpose is to put a form element, and we're going to have it enter the username on the actual page itself. So we chose to use the input tag, and now we're going to go ahead and select an attribute. Now, in this input tag, we have a few different attributes to choose from. We have a type attribute that's set to text. We have a name attribute set to username, and an ID attribute set to username. My favorite is to go with ID over those three. I kind of use my xPaths in this way. If I can find one, I'll always use ID to begin with. If I can't use that, I'll choose a value. If I can't use that, I'll go to class, followed by type, and my last choice is using the contains text method. You don't need to know all of those for now, but it's good as a reference to know as you get deeper into this that there is a reason that you want to use certain attributes or certain approaches for xPath versus others. Lots of it has to do with the fact that an HTML page, the look and feel of it is the thing that changes most often versus the functionality of it. So this input tag here has three attributes. Let's go ahead and choose my favorite, ID. So I'm going to go down here where I've created my little template, and instead of where it said data ID, I'm going to just put in ID as an attribute. And I'm going to go ahead and choose username. So I'll go username. As soon as I do that, you'll notice that this is now highlighting this HTML code and the attribute over here. I want you to notice one other very important thing, and that is that this says one of one. And one of one is important to recognize because that means there's only one of these on this entire page. Now that's a solid locator. It's possible to build locators that can have multiples, and you'll have very flaky automation if you do that. It might not even work at all. So you always want to find a one of one match when you build an xPath locator. So here I could go ahead and grab this xPath right here and use this in my variable to go and interact with this username field. Let's try to do the same thing now with the password field. So I'm going to go here and do the same thing. I'm going to go to password, I'm going to right click and inspect, and you're going to see it's going to highlight a little piece of code here. My preference is to try to always get by with one attribute and not any more. The maximum is really 2. You shouldn't have any need to ever use more than 2. There will be very, very rare, I'm talking very rare occasions where you would need to use 3. If you're using 3 or more, you're probably not using the right approach. And this is why there's trouble with the examples you'll find online, as they show these crazy xPaths that have 4 or 5 segments to them. I can guarantee you if you use those, you're going to have the flakiest automation on the planet. It's not the way you want to go. Use this approach I'm teaching you right now, and you'll have a lot more success. Okay, so for the password field, we're going to go ahead and choose, look again, we've got a tag that says input, which is basically what we used for our previous one. And we have an ID, but in this case, the ID is password. Could it really be this easy that I just have to type password? It is. And that's the beauty of xPath, is when you find the way a developer has chose to implement certain things like form fields, they tend to do it consistently throughout the application. And so once you kind of find their recipe, their formula for the way they build things, you'll begin to pick up on this faster and faster. The other thing to recognize is these locators are testable right out of the gate. I didn't need to put this into my automation code and run it to see if it worked. And this is what I love about xPath most, is this is programmatic code that can be tested in Chrome, and right away you can see whether this is going to work without ever running a lot of code of your automation code. Let's go to our third element now, which is this login button. I'm going to use the same approach, right click, inspect, and we're going to take a look at this. Now this guy, he's a little trickier than what we've worked in before. He uses one of my least favorite attributes, which is class. Yeah, I sometimes have to use it. I generally don't. Class is usually tied to the look and feel of the application. As we said before, that's going to change. So if you use class or something connected to the look and feel, you're probably going to do more maintenance than is necessary if you can find a stronger attribute. But in this case, class is one that we have here. I also want you to notice above is a tag called button. And so instead of before where we used input, right now we're going to switch over and use button as the tag type. And we can see we have, again, class is not my favorite, but let's decide we have no choice to use it. We also have type submit. This would work great until the second form is on this page, and then it won't work well at all because we have more than one match. So for the moment, let's try class radius. Again, this is not the best one in the planet, but you can get away with it. So we'll go ahead and where we selected ID before, we're going to go ahead and set this to type class, attribute of class, and we're going to go ahead and choose radius. And as soon as I do, again, I'm paying a lot of attention down here. I've got one-on-one, I'm highlighting that button, and I've got a pretty good locator that's going to be fairly reliable. Now, before we button up this video, I want to show you what can happen when you choose maybe a not such a great locator. I'm going to go back up and experiment with, let's experiment with this attribute called type text. I wonder what you're thinking right now. Do you think that we might ever have another form field with the type text? We likely will. I'm not sure we're going to have it on this one, but let's just experiment with it a little bit. So instead of button, I'm going to choose type input, and I'm going to choose the attribute of type, and I'm going to go ahead and say text. All right. I kind of lucked out this time because I have one-on-one, but if this had been a more complex form, you can almost guarantee we would have had multiples here, and this would have had, this area I'm circling with my mouse right here, would have definitely had more than one hit and would not have been a very reliable locator. So with that, let's go ahead and button up today's tutorial on xPaths. I hope you found this useful, and we'll catch you next go round. Thank you. I would love to connect with you, so feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find at Greg Paskal on LinkedIn. For those of you who are in the automation world, take a look at my book, Test Automation in the Real World. You can find more about that at realworldtestautomation.com. Thank you again.